In our hyper-connected world, we live our lives through screens. We work, talk, and love through a digital pane of glass. But we forget that every camera is an eye. Every dark, inactive lens is a one-way mirror. And sometimes, when you stare into that tiny black abyss, something apathetic to your existence stares back. This is a story for anyone who has ever felt a prickle of unease from the unblinking eye on their laptop. A story that asks a terrifying question. What if the reflection you see isn't your own? Let's begin the story. Get comfortable and listen closely. The world had shrunk to the 15-inch rectangle of her laptop screen. For Dr. Maya Sharma, or more accurately, soon-to-be Dr. Sharma, a title that felt more like a threat than a promise, this rectangle was her prison, her confessional, and her only window to a world she no longer had the energy to participate in. Her PhD dissertation in sociology, a sprawling analysis of digital subcultures and identity formation, was a cruel irony. She was studying how people lived online while her own life had been entirely consumed by it. Her apartment, a cluttered one-bedroom in a nondescript part of Chicago, was a monument to academic burnout. Stacks of books on Foucault and Baudrillard listed like sinking ships. Mugs bearing the faint brown rings of forgotten coffee stood sentinel on every flat surface. The air was thick with the scent of stale paper and the low, persistent hum of her MacBook Pro, a machine that ran hotter and longer hours than she did. Her day was a monotonous cycle of digital rituals. 9 a.m., a Zoom call with her dissertation committee, their faces pixelated and delayed, their feedback both crushingly critical and maddeningly vague. 11 a.m. to 4 p.m., a deep dive into digitized archives, her eyes scanning centuries-old texts that had been rendered into sterile, searchable data. 5 p.m., a brief, staticky video chat with her parents, where she'd perform a version of herself that was doing great and almost done. The rest of the evening, stretching deep into the night, was for writing. Or, more often, for staring at a blinking cursor on a sea of white, the weight of 80,000 words pressing down on her chest. The only constant in this digital purgatory was the small black dot at the top center of her screen, the webcam, a glass eye perpetually open, perpetually aimed directly at her face. She knew logically that the tiny green indicator light beside it had to be on for it to be active. Yet the knowledge did little to soothe the primal, reptilian part of her brain that screamed, "You are being watched." Tonight's call had been with her cohort, a group therapy session masquerading as the progress report. It had dragged on for 3 hours. When the final person signed off, Maya slammed her laptop shut with more force than intended. The satisfying clack echoed in the silent apartment. She stood up, her joints cracking in protest, and stretched until her spine popped. She ran a hand through her greasy, unwashed hair and glanced at the clock. 1:17 a.m. She reopened her laptop, not to work, but to queue up some mindless show that would hopefully numb her brain into sleep. The screen was still black, taking a moment to wake from its slumber. In that brief interval, the dark glass acted as a mirror. It reflected the soft, dim light of the floor lamp behind her, framing her tired, pale face. But her gaze wasn't on her own reflection. It was on the webcam lens. Inside the tiny, polished circle of glass, something was wrong. For a single, heart-stopping second, she saw a shape. It was a pale, milky oval, indistinct and out of focus, like a thumbprint on a negative. It was where her own reflection in the lens should be. But it wasn't her. It was too smooth, too blank. It looked like a face without features. She blinked hard. It was gone. Her own distorted reflection, nose comically large and eyes wide, now stared back at her in the lens. She leaned in, her breath fogging the screen. Nothing. Just glass. Just a smudge. It had to be a smudge. Or an optical illusion, the floaters her optometrist had warned her about. Her brain, starved of sleep and marinated in caffeine, was simply manufacturing patterns out of nothing. It was a classic symptom of exhaustion. She knew the psychology behind it. She wiped the lens with the hem of her sweatshirt. Clean. She shook her head, a short, sharp laugh escaping her lips. Get a grip, Sharma. The next day, before her morning Zoom call, she found herself rummaging through her desk drawer. Her fingers bypassed pens and paper clips, landing on a small, square pad of yellow sticky notes. She peeled one off and, without consciously deciding to do so, pressed it firmly over the webcam lens, a common privacy habit. Millions of people did it, but as she smoothed it down, she couldn't deny the new nameless unease that had prompted the action. It wasn't about hackers or the NSA. It felt more personal. It felt like she was putting a blindfold on a silent, unseen observer. And for the rest of the day, even with the camera physically covered, she couldn't shake the feeling that, from behind the thin yellow paper, the glass eye was still watching.
A week passed. The dissertation deadline loomed like a guillotine, and the memory of the face in the lens faded, filed away by Maya's rational mind as a stress-induced hallucination. The yellow sticky note remained, a bright, cheerful square of denial over the dark circle of dread. She'd peel it off for her scheduled calls, then slap it back on the second they ended, the action becoming as automatic as locking her front door. The feeling of being watched had subsided into a low-level hum of anxiety, easily mistaken for the general pressure of her PhD. It was a Tuesday night, deep in the throes of a particularly grueling chapter on mimetic warfare, that it happened again. She was on a video call with Ben Carter. Ben, a PhD student in the computer science department, was her lifeline. He was the only one who could truly understand the unique, soul-crushing despair of academia. "You look like you've been wrestling with a ghost," he said, his voice crackling slightly through her laptop speakers. His image was crisp. He had the best internet on campus. "Worse," Maya groaned, rubbing her temples. "I'm wrestling with Chapter 3. It's fighting back." "You just need a break. Log off. Go for a walk. See the sun. Remember the sun, Maya," he teased. "Very funny. I'll see the sun at my graduation, maybe." They talked for another hour, the conversation a welcome distraction that drifted from dissertation woes to department gossip to the latest trashy sci-fi show they were both watching. Finally, with a yawn, Ben signed off. "Seriously, get some sleep. Don't let the ghosts get you." The screen went black. Maya smiled weakly at his parting words, her finger moving to end the call. But she hesitated. The lamp behind her was on, casting her silhouette onto the dark screen. Her eyes, against her better judgment, flickered up to the webcam lens which she hadn't covered yet. And there it was. It wasn't a smudge. It wasn't a trick of the light. It was unmistakably a face. Pale, oval, and tilted slightly to the left. It had no hair, no ears, no mouth that she could discern. Its features were indistinct, like a sculpture made of smooth, wet clay that a thumb had wiped clean. It was not her reflection. Her own face, reflected on the larger screen, was a mask of shock, eyes wide, mouth agape. The face in the lens was placid, still, and looking out. Her heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic bird trapped in a cage of bone. She didn't blink. She didn't breathe. She leaned forward, slowly, an inch at a time. The closer she got, the more her own reflection began to dominate the glass surface. The pale face seemed to recede, to dissolve back into the darkness of the lens, until all that was left was her own terrified eyes staring back.
She jerked back as if burned. This was not a hallucination. A hallucination wouldn't vanish based on the principles of light and reflection. This was a consistent, replicable phenomenon, and that terrified her more than any ghost story ever could. Her scientific mind, her greatest asset, now became a tool of self-torture. She began to test it. She turned the lamp off. The face was gone. The lens just a black dot. She turned it back on. It reappeared, a silent observer in its tiny glass prison. She shifted her position, moving the laptop to different parts of the room. The face was only visible in the inactive lens when a light source was behind her, creating that specific semi-reflective state. It was a rule. It had physics. Panic gave way to a cold, creeping dread. She grabbed her phone, her hands trembling, and called Ben back. She tried to keep her voice level, casual, injecting a note of academic curiosity into it. "Hey, weird question for you," she began, pacing her small living room. "You're the tech guy. Have you ever heard of a weird visual artifact in a webcam lens? You mean like dead pixels, screen burn-in?" "No, not on the screen. In the lens itself. When it's off, I keep thinking I see a face in my webcam reflection." I forced a laugh. It sounded brittle and high-pitched. There was a pause on the other end. Then Ben chuckled, the sound she had been dreading. "Maya, that's classic PhD burnout. You're seeing faces in the noise. It's called pareidolia. Your brain is hardwired to find faces in random patterns. Toast, clouds, static, dark webcam lenses." "But it's so consistent, Ben." "Because the lighting in your room is consistent. Your brain is just filling in the same blanks every time." "Seriously," he said, his tone softening with genuine concern. "It's a sign. You're overworked. Your visual cortex is going into overdrive. Cover the camera up and get some sleep. A real 8 hours. Doctor's orders." She mumbled an agreement, thanked him, and hung up. Pareidolia. He was probably right. It was the most logical explanation. But as she stood in the silent apartment, her gaze fixed on the laptop sitting on her desk, she felt a profound sense of isolation. Her own mind, her most trusted ally, was now a suspect. And across the room, she knew, a pale, featureless face was waiting patiently in the dark, watching her. The sticky note was no longer enough. Maya bought a small plastic webcam shutter online, a sleek black slider that offered a more definitive physical barrier. The click it made as it slid into place was a small comfort, a tiny sound of control in a life that was spiraling out of it. She tried to follow Ben's advice. She attempted to sleep more, drank less coffee, and even forced herself on a walk around the block, the sunlight feeling alien on her skin. But the image of the smooth, clay-like face was seared onto the inside of her eyelids. Then the misfortunes began. They were small at first, the kind of digital hiccups that were frustrating but easily dismissed as bad luck. An important email to her dissertation advisor, containing a meticulously revised chapter, was mysteriously routed to his spam folder. He didn't see it for 3 days, leading to a tense, accusatory conversation about her lack of progress. She swore she sent it. He believed she was making excuses. A few days later, she woke up to a notification from her cloud storage service. A failed login attempt was made on your account from an IP address in Odessa, Ukraine. She immediately changed her password, her heart thudding with a familiar rhythm of fear. But the incident left a bitter taste in her mouth. It felt targeted. It felt like a warning. The real blow came a week later. She had spent a solid 72 hours, fueled by caffeine and sheer willpower, rewriting her disastrous 3rd chapter. It was, she thought, the best work she had ever done. The arguments were sharp, the evidence was compelling, the prose was almost elegant. She saved the file, dissertation underscore ch3 underscore v4 underscore final.docs, and backed it up to her external hard drive. The next morning, she opened the document to give it one last proofread before sending it. A Microsoft Word error message popped up. The file is corrupted and cannot be opened. Cold panic washed over her. It was okay. It was fine. She had the backup. She plugged in the external drive, navigated to the folder, and double-clicked. The file is corrupted and cannot be opened. It was impossible. A simultaneous, identical corruption on two separate drives? It defied probability. She spent the entire day on tech support forums, downloading file recovery software, her hope dwindling with every failed attempt. The chapter was gone. A week of her life vanished into a void of scrambled code. That night, exhausted and defeated, she sat slumped in her chair, staring at her laptop. The lamplight behind her cast its usual reflection, and in the lens, the face was waiting. It had changed. The smooth, blank surface was no longer uniform. Two faint, dark depressions had formed, like shallow thumbprints pressed into the clay where eyes should be. They were empty, devoid of detail, but their placement was undeniably ocular. It was looking at her. More than that, it felt like it was becoming more defined, more aware of her observing it. A silent witness to her digital ruin. A sudden, intense chill radiated from the laptop, making the hairs on her arms stand on end. She touched the chassis near the webcam. It was unnaturally cold, a stark contrast to the heat pumping out of the side vents. She held her hand there, and the laptop's internal fan, which had been silent, suddenly whirred to life, spinning at maximum speed as if trying to cool down a processor engaged in a Herculean task. Yet the machine was idle. No programs were running. It was processing something unseen. Maya snatched her hand back, a strangled sob caught in her throat. The correlation was no longer a paranoid fantasy. It was a terrifying pattern. The face in the lens wasn't just a passive observer. It was a harbinger, an anchor point for a malevolence that was actively, methodically, and silently dismantling her life one bite at a time.
Okay, that's not normal leg. Ben's face, usually a picture of laid-back amusement, was tight with concern. They were on a video call, and for the third time in 10 minutes, Maya's video feed had glitched in a profoundly disturbing way. It wasn't the usual pixelation or freezing. For a split second, her image had frozen with her eyes locked wide open, the pupils unnaturally large and dark, creating a grotesque, doll-like caricature of her own face. The audio had also developed a persistent, faint static, like the whisper of a radio tuned between stations, humming just beneath her words. "I'm telling you, Ben, something is wrong with this machine," Maya said, her voice shaking. She felt a perverse sense of relief. For the first time, the phenomenon had a witness. "It's got to be a driver issue or a problem with the GPU," Ben reasoned, but his conviction was gone. "When I froze, what did you see?" "Your eyes," he said, hesitating. "They looked wrong. Black, like completely black. And your audio, it sounds like someone is whispering right behind you." Maya went cold. She was alone in the apartment. "I'm taking it to the campus tech services tomorrow." "Good idea," Ben said, his eye scanning her video feed with a new, worried intensity. "And Maya, seriously, stay off it until then. Use your phone or something." But Maya knew it wasn't a simple hardware problem. The cold spot, the spinning fan, the gradual emergence of features on the face and the lens, it all pointed to something else. Her sociologist brain, trained to find patterns in human behavior, now frantically sought a pattern in the inhuman.
The entity was tied to the device. And if it was tied to the device, it might have a history. Driven by a paranoia that had now sharpened into a fierce investigative focus, she began digging. She had bought the MacBook refurbished from an authorized reseller 2 years ago. It was a way to save money, a common practice for cash-strapped grad students. She found the original receipt in her email archives. Mac Refurb Pros, LLC. A quick search led her to their website. They had a support section for looking up past orders using the device's serial number. She flipped the cold, metallic laptop over. The serial number was printed in tiny, faint gray letters. C02T. She typed it into the search bar, her heart pounding. The order history popped up along with the original service record from when the reseller had acquired it. It had been wiped and certified, of course. But there was a note in the intake log. Device acquired from University Surplus Auction. Original owner, K. Holloway. Item condition, minor cosmetic wear. NVRAM reset required. K. Holloway. A name. It was the first real clue. Her fingers flew across the keyboard. She logged into her university's student and alumni database, a privilege of her PhD candidacy. She searched for K. Holloway. One result. Kendra Holloway, former undergraduate student, College of Fine Arts. Status: deceased. A wave of nausea hit Maya so hard she had to grip the sides of her desk. Deceased. She clicked on the alumni profile, but it was sparse. It listed Kendra's major as photography in her years of attendance, which ended abruptly 2.5 years ago. Cause of death was not listed. This was no longer a technical problem. This was a grave site she was excavating. The next step was the dark underbelly of the internet. She searched Kendra Holloway suicide and Kendra Holloway University death. The official news reports were scant and clinical, citing privacy for the family. A 20-year-old student found dead in her dorm room. No foul play suspected. But it was in the university's old, unofficial student forums, on Dusty's subreddits dedicated to campus lore, that she found her. She found Kendra. Post after post from 2 years ago painted a chilling picture. Friends and classmates described a bright, talented photography student who had become increasingly erratic and paranoid in her final months. A user named PhotoGeek88 wrote, Kendra was getting really weird. She covered every camera in her room with black tape, said she was being watched through her computer. She claimed that something was in the screen, living in the glass. Another, art major alum, replied, I was her RA. She was terrified. She complained that her digital work was being erased, that her camera was taking pictures by itself. She said she could see a face in the lens. We all thought she was having a breakdown from the pressure. We tried to get her help. The final, most chilling post was from an anonymous user. I heard from a friend who knew the cop on scene. They found her in her room. Her laptop was on her desk, open. The screen was wiped completely clean, a factory reset. But the sticky note she had put over the webcam had been peeled off and placed on the screen, right in the middle. And on it, in her handwriting, was a single word: watching. Maya leaned back, the air leaving her lungs in a long, shuddering gasp. It wasn't a glitch. It wasn't pareidolia. It was an echo, and she had just found its source. She was holding Kendra Holloway's haunted tombstone in her hands. Knowledge is a dangerous thing. It can illuminate, but it can also corrupt. Now that Maya knew Kendra's story, the entity in the lens began to change with terrifying speed. The psychic clay was being molded by her awareness. She forced herself to look again, a morbid curiosity overriding her fear. The face was still pale and unnervingly smooth, but it was no longer featureless. The 2 dark depressions that served as eyes now seemed to hold a flicker of something within them, a hint of depth. The vague outline of its head now carried the subtle suggestion of a hairstyle, long dark hair, parted slightly to one side, just like in the single photo on Kendra's memorialized student profile. The curve of its jaw, the faint line that might be a mouth. It was all beginning to coalesce, to take on the ghostly, water-damaged features of the dead girl. It was horrifying, but for Maya, the sociologist, it was also a breakthrough, a terrible, paradigm-shifting breakthrough. She called Ben, her voice no longer panicked, but charged with a strange, feverish clarity. "It's not Kendra's ghost," she explained, pacing her apartment, the phone pressed hard against her ear. "A ghost is the spirit of a person. This is something else." "Maya, what are you talking about?" Ben's voice was strained. He was past the point of rational explanations, but not yet ready to leap into the abyss with her. "Think about it from a sociological perspective, Ben. Think about Kendra, a photography student. Her focus, her art, her life was about looking through a lens. Then her paranoia starts. Where does she focus all of that intense, crippling fear? That feeling of being watched, of being invaded. On the one lens she can't control, the webcam, the one that's always looking back. For months, maybe a year, all of her terror, her anxiety, her psychological decay was directed at that single point. It's not a ghost, Ben. It's a psychic imprint, a digital echo. The sheer emotional energy focused so intensely on a piece of hardware created a kind of residue, a lens ghoul." There was a long silence on the other end of the line. "A lens ghoul," Ben repeated, the words sounding absurd and terrifying at the same time. "Yes, it's an entity born of fear. It's formless, mindless at first, just an echo. It lies dormant until it senses a new host, someone in a similar state of mind, stressed, isolated, spending countless hours staring at the screen, feeding it with their own focused attention. That was me. My burnout, my dissertation stress. I was the perfect psychic food for it. I woke it up." "And now that you know about Kendra?" Ben trailed off, understanding dawning in his voice. "Now it's using my knowledge to shape itself. It's pulling the image of her from my own mind. It's a feedback loop." This new theory, as terrifying as it was, gave Maya a strange sense of agency. She wasn't just being haunted, she was participating in a psycho-digital phenomenon that could be analyzed. But the entity seemed to be a step ahead. Her research began to take strange turns. When she searched for articles on academic stress, the top results would be obscure papers on surveillance trauma and digital consciousness. When she was looking for a specific sociologist, her search algorithm would inexplicably highlight a philosopher who wrote about the gaze of the other. It felt like the entity was guiding her, leading her down a specific intellectual path. But to what end? Was it trying to help her understand its nature? Or was it subtly, insidiously leading her down the exact same trail of paranoia and obsession that had consumed Kendra Holloway? Was it teaching her its language? Or was it writing her into its suicide note? The line between research and indoctrination had blurred completely. The lens school was no longer just an echo, it was becoming her collaborator. The prison had expanded. The horror was no longer contained within the metal and glass of her MacBook. It had learned to travel. The first time it happened, she was in her kitchen, her laptop mercifully closed on the desk in the other room. She was procrastinating, scrolling through social media on her phone. She swiped out of the app, and for a brief second before the home screen loaded, the phone screen went black. And in the center of it, reflected in the dark glass, was the face. Pale, vaguely familiar with Kendra's sad, suggested features looking out from behind the screen of her iPhone. Maya dropped the phone. It clattered to the floor, the screen cracking. She scrambled back, crab walking away until her back hit the kitchen cabinets. She stared at the phone on the linoleum floor, her breath coming in ragged gasps. It wasn't in the laptop. The laptop was just the anchor, the point of origin. Now that it was awake and fed, now that she had acknowledged it, it had learned to find her. It could access any dark reflective lens that was pointed in her direction. The world began to close in on her. The next day, she saw it looking out from the black inactive screen of her tablet. Later that week, she was staring out her apartment window at the building across the street. In the dark glass of her neighbor's window, for a fleeting moment, she saw that same pale oval face, a ghostly image superimposed over the reflection of the sky, watching her from across the divide. Her life became a frantic ritual of immediacy. She covered the front-facing camera on her phone with a piece of electrical tape. She threw a towel over her tablet. She began to draw the blinds in her apartment, living in a state of perpetual twilight, terrified of catching a glimpse of the face in a window pane. Every screen, every camera, every reflective black surface was a potential eye. Her television, the microwave display, the glass on a picture frame. The world had become a panopticon, and she was its only prisoner. This self-imposed digital darkness was meant to protect her, but it only served to isolate her completely. She stopped calling Ben, terrified the face would manifest on his screen. She ignored emails from her advisor. The four walls of her apartment, once a sanctuary of study, now felt like a tomb. And the isolation only made the feeling of being watched more potent. It was an oppressive weight in the air, a constant pressure at the back of her neck. It emanated from the covered lenses, a silent, screaming presence that no tape or cloth could block. The entity's nature was also changing. It was no longer a passive, static image. When she dared to peek, in moments of morbid, self-destructive curiosity, the face in her laptop lens seemed to hold a flicker of something new. Its subtle shifts were no longer random. A slight tilt of the head, a deepening of the eye sockets that suggested sorrow, a faint, almost imperceptible parting of the featureless line of its mouth. It wasn't just watching, it wanted something. It was trying to communicate, to achieve a goal. Its growing clarity, its increasingly complex expressions felt like a wordless negotiation. Perhaps it wanted to be fully seen, to be acknowledged so completely that it could become real, stepping through the glass into her world. Or perhaps its goal was simpler and far more sinister. Perhaps it wanted to provoke in her the exact same crescendo of terror and isolation that had given it birth in Kendra. It wasn't just an echo of a tragedy, it was trying to create another. The ultimatum came on a Thursday night. Maya, desperate for some semblance of normalcy, had finally agreed to a video call with Ben. He was worried sick. She hadn't answered his texts in days. She peeled the shutter off her webcam, her hand slick with sweat, and initiated the call. "Maya, thank God," Ben said, his face flooding with relief. "I was about to call campus security to do a wellness check. Are you okay? You look—" "I'm fine," she lied, her voice a croak. They talked for a few minutes, the conversation strained. Maya couldn't focus. Her eyes kept darting between Ben's image and her own video preview in the corner of the screen. She looked hollowed out, a ghost in her own machine. Then, it happened. "What's it trying to do, Maya?" Ben asked, his voice gentle. "What do you think it wants?" As she opened her mouth to answer, her own video feed flickered. For 3 terrifying seconds, her image was gone, completely replaced. On the screen, where she should have been, was the lens ghoul. It was clearer than ever before. It had Kendra's dark hair, her sorrowful, empty eyes, her pale skin. Its mouth was a thin, black line, and as Maya and Ben watched in frozen horror, the line opened, stretching impossibly wide into a silent, screaming "oh." There was no sound, but the image itself was a shriek that tore through the fabric of reality. Then, just as quickly, it was gone. Maya's own shocked face was back in the preview window. Ben was white as a sheet. "Jesus Christ!" he whispered, his voice trembling. "I saw her! I saw her!" The entity wasn't done. A notification popped up on Maya's screen. Dissertation Chapter 3 V4 Final.docx has been restored from a temporary file. Hope surged in Maya's chest for a split second before she clicked it open. The document was there, but the text, her meticulously crafted arguments, had been replaced. Page after page was filled with a single scrawled image, a crude drawing of a stick figure staring at a screen, with a larger, screaming face inside the screen, reaching out. It was an ultimatum communicated in the only language it knew: digital manipulation. "Acknowledge me. Let me in, or I will erase you." It would destroy her work, her career, her digital identity, leaving her with nothing but the paranoia it fed upon. A strange calm settled over Maya. The fear was still there, a cold stone in her stomach, but it was now overshadowed by a fierce, defiant clarity. She couldn't hide from it. She couldn't destroy it. She had to confront it. This was her field of study, the interaction between humanity and the digital world. This was her dissertation defense. "Then, stay on the line," she said, her voice steady. "Don't hang up. Be my witness." She closed the corrupted Word document. She minimized the video call window, leaving only Ben's small, worried face in the corner. She sat up straight, squared her shoulders, and stared directly into the black, malevolent eye of the webcam. She knew the face was there, watching her, waiting. She didn't scream. She didn't cry. She did what she was trained to do. She analyzed. "Hello," she said aloud, her voice echoing in the silent room. "I see you. I know what you are." She forced herself to hold its gaze, to look past the terrifying visage of Kendra and see the mechanism beneath. You are not a ghost. You are not a demon. You are a psychic imprint, a feedback loop of fear born from trauma and sustained by attention. She leaned closer, her voice dropping, not in fear, but in clinical assessment. Kendra's trauma and pain, focused on this single point, gave you your spark. My stress, my isolation, my fear, that was your fuel. You reflect the observer's psychological state. You are pareidolia given power. In the lens, the face seemed to recoil. The silent scream faltered. You have no agency of your own. You only have the power I give you. You feed on my fear, but you were also shaped by my knowledge. She felt an empathy, not for the entity, but for its creator. Kendra's suffering created this echo. She was your first victim, but I will not be your second. I will not participate in this loop. Her trauma ends here. Your existence ends with my refusal to fear you. With her eyes still locked on the lens, she moved her mouse. She navigated to her system settings, to the disk utility. She initiated a full factory reset, a complete wipe of the system. A dialog box appeared. "Are you sure you want to erase this Mac? This action cannot be undone." Staring down the face in the camera, the echo of a dead girl, the ghoul born of terror, Maya whispered, "I'm sure." And she clicked erase. As the progress bar for the system wipe began to fill, the face in the webcam reacted. It wasn't a flash of light or a demonic roar. It was something far more terrifying. The features, Kendra's hair, her sorrowful eyes, her screaming mouth, began to distort. Not violently, but as if being pulled apart by a gentle tide. The image seemed to stretch and thin, losing its coherence, the lines of its form bleeding back into the undifferentiated paleness from which they came. For a final, haunting moment, it was just the smooth, featureless oval again. Then, with a slow, deliberate calmness, it faded completely, dissolving into the simple blackness of the glass. The lens was empty. For the first time in months, it was truly, utterly empty. The oppressive weight in the room vanished. The feeling of being watched, a constant pressure she had grown so accustomed to she barely noticed it anymore, lifted like a physical burden being taken off her shoulders. The air in the apartment felt lighter, cleaner. On the screen, Ben was just staring, his mouth open. It's gone. Maya took a deep, shuddering breath that turned into a sob of pure, unadulterated relief. The system wipe finished. The screen displayed a simple, multilingual hello. A blank slate. The aftermath was quiet. The next day, Maya took the laptop, the source of her torment, to an electronics recycling center. She didn't smash it with a hammer or throw it in a river. That would be an act of fear. Instead, she calmly handed it over to the clerk, a final, dispassionate act of severance. She emailed her advisor and officially requested a leave of absence, citing severe burnout and personal health issues. There was no argument. She knew her PhD and perhaps her academic career was over, but she felt no sadness. She had faced a final exam of a different kind and survived. She spent the next few months reclaiming her life from the screen, taking long walks, meeting friends for coffee, and reading physical, paper books. She was healing. 6 months later, Maya was living in a new apartment with bigger windows. She had a new laptop, a different brand. The first thing she did when she took it out of the box was to affix a thick, opaque plastic shutter over the webcam. It was a permanent fixture, a statement. She'd begun writing again. Not a dissertation, but personal essays about digital mental health, the real, tangible dangers of isolation and paranoia in our relentlessly connected world. She was on a video call with Ben. Her new laptop was propped up, the webcam shutters slid open for the call. They were laughing about something stupid, their conversation easy and normal, a relic of a past she was slowly reclaiming. "It's good to see you smile, Maya," he said, his own face beaming, really good. "It's good to be smiling," she replied. When they hung up, she ended the call and slid the plastic shutter closed with a decisive click. The screen went black. Her gaze drifted, as it sometimes did, to the closed shutter. A solid black piece of plastic. Safe. But for a split second, a single, terrifying, ambiguous moment, she thought she saw it move. Not the shutter itself, but something behind it. A tiny, almost imperceptible bulge from the inside pressing against the plastic before settling back into place. Her breath caught in her throat. A cold dread, faint but familiar, trickled down her spine. Her hand, trembling slightly, rose toward the shutter. She could check. She could slide it open just to be sure, just to prove to herself that it was a trick of the light, a phantom of her trauma. But she stopped. Her fingers hovered an inch from the laptop. She would not look. She would not check. She would not feed the fear. The entity, the echo, whatever it was, only had the power she gave it. To look was to engage, to question, to doubt. To turn away was to deny. Maya pulled her hand back, took a deep breath, and turned away from the screen. She walked to the window and looked out at the real, tangible world. The choice, now and forever, was hers. Enjoyed the story? Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more. We love to hear your thoughts in the comments below.